Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am Cardinal Damon Martin.
And I am Padre Patricio de Guerra.
And
Hello.
Patrick, this week we are reviewing a film that Christians all across the country are falling right in love with. A movie now out called Immaculate, starring the it girl of the moment, Sydney Sweeney.
Oh my gosh, everybody get ready, because here comes Immaculate, released in March of 2024, of course, starring, as you said, Sydney Sweeney as Sister Cecilia, Alvaro Morte as Father Sal Tedeschi, Simona Tabasco as Sister Mary Benedetta Porcaroli, oh shit, I'm bad at reading Italian names, as Sister Gwen, and many more. Damon, of course, directed by Michael Moen, written by Andrew Lobel, and produced by the it girl of the moment, Damon, Sydney Sweeney, having a serious moment, by the way. Sydney is just kind of all over the place right now. And she conceived, Damon, this beautiful little child known as Immaculate.
I think your Italian is perfectly fine.
Si, corretto.
Correcto. Gorlami. Gorlami. By the way, so speaking of Italian, I think we have quite a few audience members who I think skew older and even older than you and I. I often get, if you look at my face and you can check out my mug on YouTube, I often get Father Guido Sarducci from Saturday Night Live, and I used to actually have a black brim hat that I would wear when I would be out desert shooting. And one of the other shooters out there was like, "It's Father Guido Sarducci," and I was like, "I see it. I just need the purple tinted glasses, and I do look like him."
There you go. There you go. So you have that religious connection to your demeanor.
In more ways than one, Damon, because I was indeed raised Catholic, and this movie, I'll tell you right away, just like, I'm always very curious about movies that deal with Catholicism or Catholic adjacent, like, sort of mysticism, because I'm very far removed from being a Catholic at this point in my life. I mean, very far removed. I think I hightailed it. I think literally the day I became an adult, I was like, cool, I am never doing this shit again. So I'm always fascinated by movies that have some sort of Catholic tinge to them. And yeah, Damon, if this had come out in a different time, this would be the only thing the Catholic Church would be able to talk about, is how absolutely blasphemous a movie like Immaculate is. Although there's plenty of people of certain persuasions that are up in arms about this movie right now, Damon. Are they right? Is Immaculate absolutely unholy and heretic?
So let me two things I want to say. One is, I think I made it clear on this show, and I'm not saying this to offend anybody. I'm just putting it out there. You grew up Catholic. I grew up in a Baptist home. But I am not religious any longer. I am an atheist. I'm not saying that to offend our audience. I'm saying that as just like a matter of fact. If you are religious, cool, good for you. Don't care. That's totally fine. Support doing whatever you want to do.
Just leave us alone.
Yeah, I don't care. Like, I'm not saying that as like putting a wall up to our audience saying, like, I'm this way, you have to be that way. I don't care. Like, believe what you want to believe. Totally fine with that. I'm not begrudging that. I grew up in a Baptist home, though, so I understand religion very well. I've read the Bible a couple times. Like, I understand religion pretty well. Part two is that what I appreciate about this movie called Immaculate is Neon, the studio that made it, has really leaned into it. Like, they have gone, because there's a lot of people who are really angry about this film, and you know, this, I mean, I remember when Kevin Smith put out Dogma in the early 2000s, whatever, late 90s, early 2000s, and people were like protesting outside movie theaters, and he got into a big battle with the Westboro Baptist Church, and like,
Westboro Baptist, yeah.
All that, like, it got ugly, and, you know, there were death threats and everything flying around. So, you know, these are the kind of movies that do stir up a lot of people and kind of raise the cackles of the religious community. And I wanted to, Neon, the studio that did this, indie studio, kind of like, Neon is kind of like the new A24. Like, they are a newer studio, but they've been getting a lot of publicity. They did Anatomy of a Fall, which was an Oscar-winning movie.
Good movie, too.
A great movie. I just saw it recently. Really, really good movie. They did that, and so they're kind of like the new A24 to me. Like, A24 is an established, great studio, and they have huge credentials at this point. I think Neon is kind of like the next stage of that. Indie studio producing a lot of films that you know. And they got a lot of comments, and it went so far that they made a meme and put it up on Twitter. And I want to read this because I thought it was, I'm not begrudging religious people from having an opinion. Certainly not, because you're more than entitled to an opinion.
Sure.
It was funny to me that Neon just leaned into it and made a meme, and actually someone said, I need this on a shirt, and they jokingly put it on a t-shirt, which I thought was hilarious. But it said, Libs saw how the anti-woke crowd embraced Sydney Sweeney as their new darling, and right away had to shove her in this blasphemous, satanic, feminist, pro-abortion, anti-life movie degrading Christians. This movie also debases Mary, Mary, mother of the Christ. Now, it's a funny, I mean, when you read that, you're like, wow, that person really has a problem with this movie. The funny part about that is, and you remember this from last year, Sydney Sweeney, or maybe it was 2 years ago during the pandemic, I think it was, Sydney Sweeney posted a video and a couple of photos from a birthday party that she had held with some family members. I think she's originally from Washington State, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's correct.
And someone in the family in the video had a MAGA hat on, the Make America Great Again hat. And immediately everyone was like, oh my God, Sydney Sweeney is actually a right-leaning conservative. The right side was like, amazing, we got an A-list actress on our side. The left side is like, screw her, we want nothing to do with her. To me, both sides were inherently wrong.
Yeah.
It was a birthday party for her family. I don't think that said one thing about her one way or the other. It didn't mean she's like a crazy liberal. It didn't mean she's a crazy conservative. She had a member of her family wearing a hat at a party. Now, I'm not real close with my family anymore, but I grew up in a very conservative family. My family was like, they thought Ronald Reagan was Christ. Like, that's the family I grew up in. So I know all sides of this. Like, I see both sides, but it was hilarious that they had this. So when they say, the right loving, when they say the embraced, Sydney Sweeney is their new darling, and reality is what this tweet or what this message clearly didn't understand is this was a movie that Sydney Sweeney personally championed. Like, she auditioned for this as a 16-year-old, never left her thoughts. She went as far as to buy the script, produce it, found financing, hired the director. Like, this is her baby. Like, this is not to make a joke about the movie. This is her baby. Like, she was the one who championed this. So that comment in particular made me laugh because I'm like, do you like, everyone is entitled to their opinion, but at least have an informed opinion. Like, you can't say this is the Hollywood putting her in this movie. This was her movie. She wanted to do this.
She brought this to Hollywood. She literally was like, this movie's dead and buried. I would love to resurrect it. I want to do it. Me, Sydney Sweeney, America's sweetheart. I really want to do this movie. I'm literally going to go to the writer and go, let's make this movie. Let's find a way to make this movie. She brought it to the world. Sydney Sweeney did it. Hollywood didn't do it. Newsflash, folks, I've worked in Hollywood. I don't always work in Hollywood, but I have. It's just a bunch of people fucking around like in any other industry, quite literally. There is no grand cabal. There is no big conspiracy. It's literally just an actor went, hey, I really like this script. I want to champion it. And I'm really way into that. And I was really happy to hear that that's indeed what she did. And she's produced a few other things too. Actors need to take control of their careers. And it's very easy for someone like Sydney Sweeney, who sort of had a quick surge, to just sort of take whatever is given to her. And she did a great interview with Josh Horowitz. Shout out to the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast, the podcast that got me into listening to podcasts and now being on a podcast. He had her on. And she just talked about the garbage roles she has handed in Hollywood, where it's just like, oh, be the pretty girl, be the romantic, side piece to some leading man. And she was just like, no, I want to do things like that can show off what I'm here to do, which is act. Another person who's like that, Margot Robbie, who just produced a $1 billion movie called Barbie. She produces tons of stuff because she didn't just want to be literally, she didn't want to just be a Barbie doll, like danced around the stage. That's all Hollywood knew what to do with her. Sydney Sweeney, like Margot Robbie, decided she wanted to take control of her career and do things she's actually passionate about. She's actually genuinely passionate about Immaculate because she grew up with a dad who loves horror. And that's a way her and her dad bonded. They would sit down and watch horror movies together. I don't know that she's like a super horror aficionado, but she sure as fuck is now because she produced a movie about it. And by the way, Damon, without giving anything away, a very competent movie. And I think that's what's really interesting is when I sat down to do this, I like the trailer. This looks interesting. What's it all really going to be about though? And when I sat down with it and watched it, I thought to myself, oh, like there is something here. There is something here. And it's not like the most, again, we're dancing around in our pre-spoiler section here. It's not that it's like the most sophisticated, the most like groundbreaking subversive movie I've ever seen. It's just solidly made. It's solidly produced. All the right people are in place to just make a good, enjoyable movie.
So a couple things I want to say about this. First, I want to start with Sydney Sweeney because you're right. Sydney Sweeney, I like to use the phrase on the show a lot, Patrick, the smartest one in the room. Sydney Sweeney doesn't get credit nearly enough for being the smartest one in the room. She is an incredibly intelligent person, the way she has attacked and taken control of her career. And when I first discovered Sydney Sweeney, it was from Euphoria. I watched Euphoria. I loved the show. That's where I'd first seen Sydney Sweeney. And then, of course, she went out and branched out, started doing movies, other things she was doing, and I became a fan of Sydney Sweeney. Where I knew Sydney Sweeney was one of the smartest people in Hollywood was a recent interview she did because she did a little movie called Madam Web, which, did you ever see Madam Web? Did you end up seeing it?
No. I don't really see the Sony comic book movies until they come home to TV. The kids like them.
I did see it, and I wrote a pretty scathing review of the movie. It was as bad as everyone tells you it is that bad. It is horrifically bad. And I wrote if you go over to my website, nerdcoremovement.com, and you search for the review, you'll find it. And I kind of did like almost like a very non-traditional review where I just asked questions and then answered the questions. Because I was like, first off, whose idea was it for this? Because I don't think anyone was asking for this movie. One of my questions in my review was, who decided to go she's all that on Sydney Sweeney? Because in the movie, we all know I'm not saying, like, I don't think I'm saying anything controversial by saying Sydney Sweeney is well known as a very attractive young woman. That's not offensive. I'm not saying that. And by the way, she's far more than that. I'm just saying, like, she's well known as a very attractive young woman. In that movie, they basically went she's all that on her. What I mean is they put her behind a pair of glasses and a really bad wig and then kind of made her dress kind of like,
frumpy
like
or whatever.
Frumpy. And they're like, oh, she's this nerdy, like, quiet girl. And I'm like, really? Like, why do we have to pretend this? Like, you know what I mean? Like, stop.
That old trope.
You know what I'm talking about? The she's all that, right? Like,
oh my God, it's the tiredest trope because when men completely dominated the storytelling front in movies, that's what you did. You go, oh, how do we ugly up this hot girl, and then we'll reveal she's hot. Surprise! Yeah. It's like every man's fantasy, right? But it's super reductive and just doesn't hold up in any way, shape, or form.
So they did that to her, and I was like, whose bad idea was this? Like, this is terrible. Like, what an idea. But then I read an interview with Sydney Sweeney where they asked her about Madam Web because nobody that's attached to the movie likes it. You can tell, like, Dakota Johnson just flat out, like, ripped the movie to shreds. And, like,
I love her
she was a star. I absolutely adore her for it. But Sydney Sweeney, the smartest one in the room, said something that was brilliant. She said, I was basically a hired gun for the movie. I didn't have any influence over my part. I didn't have any influence over the script. I got hired and I did the movie. But here's why I did the movie, because it opened the door and created a relationship with Sony, the studio, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the studio that went on to make her new film, Anyone But You, which ended up making a boatload of money.
About $200 million, yeah.
Huge money for a romantic comedy at the theater. Huge money. I mean, it made massive money, became a huge breakout hit for her. When she said that, I did the movie because it opened the door to get me in the door with Sony. I was like, Sydney Sweeney's operating on a different level, and you need to show her respect because that is a smart woman right there. Because, yes, Madam Web is a piece of shit. And I think when you read interviews with anyone involved with the movie, they're telling you it's a piece of shit.
I think that's a direct quote from Dakota Johnson.
This is a piece of shit. But Sydney Sweeney saying, it opened the door for me to create a relationship with the studio, and now I can go to them with these ideas and say, hey, I want to make Anyone But You. I want to make my next film. I want to do this. And they're going to listen because she played ball and did a role for them. That's brilliant. That is showing you how smart Sydney Sweeney is. And so for her to see and to audition for a role at 16, by the way, as a teenager, and never let that script leave her mind, a decade later when she actually has influence in the industry and she is one of the biggest stars now in Hollywood, and says, you know what, I never forgot about that story that I auditioned for. It never got made, but I want to do it. So she reached out to the writer, bought the script, updated it, of course, because it was now a decade old, and the original script was based on a teenager
in a boarding school. Yeah,
and she updated the script and everything, and then she went out and hired the director, who she had worked on in a previous film called The Voyeurs, which is on Amazon Prime. She did that. She hired the director. She found the producer she wanted to work with. Of course, she was an executive producer as well. And then she went out and found financing and found Neon as a studio to produce the film. That shows you how not only this was such a passion project for Sydney Sweeney, but it shows you how freaking brilliant this woman is, that she went to those lengths to make this movie. And just to go all the way back to the original point about that meme, no one put her in this movie. She put herself in this movie, and this is her baby. And again, we can't get too deep into spoilers yet because there's a lot that we have to talk about with spoilers, unfortunately. But what she actually created, in my opinion, in Immaculate, was a mostly originally, listen, there are themes that are not, I mean, you can only go so far with like these religious horror films. You know, generally with religious horror films, you're going to deal with possession or some other funkiness with religion. You know what I mean? There's only so many directions you're going to go with a religious horror film. This is not a possession film, just to put that out there, and I think you can tell that by the trailer. That's not a spoiler. There are themes in this movie that you'll feel recognizable, that will feel familiar. But what this film did that surprised me beyond words, I know Neon is an independent studio, but this is a mainstream release. This is a mainstream release going into theaters. This movie, Patrick, and I think you'll agree with me, it goes fucking hard. This movie is not PG-13. This movie is not, let's bring the family to watch a horror film. This is a hardcore horror film. And that, to me, was so impressive because I'll be honest, I went in thinking they're going to pull some punches. I honestly went in thinking they're going to pull some punches. They pulled no punches in this movie.
They pull zero punches, Damon. If any of our listeners out there really, like, obviously you and I are kind of caught up in the trades. We read trades daily. We're kind of focused on this shit. That's kind of what we do. That's our obsession, and that's why this podcast happened. And some of our listeners aren't necessarily that keyed in. They're just like, Sydney Sweeney, that girl that's like in stuff all the time. Like, really? Tonight, you now will worship at the altar of Our Lady of Immaculate Conception, Sydney Sweeney. Why? Because a major Hollywood star who could do whatever the fuck she wants to do, because she's the it girl right now, chose to champion a horror film, a hardcore horror film. And she did that knowing very well she has a massive fan base. A lot of them are, young women between the ages of like 15 and 30 who are, and by the way, plenty of other people beyond. I know men, women, they and thems that are all that love Sydney Sweeney. She made a really solidly made horror film, hard R horror film for a whole new generation of people. That's important. It's important for the longevity. A lot of horror directors have got gray in their beards and their hair now. She's ushering in a whole new generation of people who will appreciate it because they sure as shit went to this because they follow anything Sydney Sweeney does. And they went, well, I got to go see. I love Sydney Sweeney. I got to go see this movie. Oh my God, this is terribly disturbing. Oh my God, this is really dark. Oh my God, this is insane. Oh my God, I love it. Oh my God, what other movies does Sydney Sweeney watch? And then she lists them off. Of course, during her massive round of press for this movie, she listed off many of the classics. So I would say kind of like a safe list, like Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and stuff like that. But good stuff nonetheless. Guess what all those fans of Sydney Sweeney are going to do? They're going to take Sydney Sweeney's list and they're going to watch the movies that she watched. That's influence. That's an influencer. That's what we're always talking about when that buzzy word comes around. She's an it girl for a lot of different reasons, and now she's an it girl introducing horror to a whole bunch of people who are probably not in the horror demo. Damon, just again, now we have to put up a shrine for Sydney Sweeney because she backed us up when she could have backed anything she wanted. She chose to back horror, and she chose to make sure, because she's the producer of this movie, that it's like a top shelf horror movie. I mean, come on. They're like she will always have my praise. She's really gonna have to fuck up to lose it at this point.
So to get into the movie itself, and again, without getting into spoilers yet, we already kind of talked about the plot of this movie, but really the plot circles around a young woman named Cecilia who dealt with a trauma as a teenager where she almost drowned in a lake. She fell into an icy lake and almost drowned, and she was actually dead. Her heart stopped for 7 minutes, and she was revived, and that gave her the gift to where she believed God saved her for a reason. And so she decided to dedicate her life to God and become a nun. Her convent outside, I think she said Michigan, closed down, and they personally recruited her to come to this very secluded, very exclusive convent in the middle of Italy, which is mainly, we start at the beginning of the movie, we find out is basically a convent for elder nuns and elder priests to go before they die. As they start to reach dementia and sickness and older age, they're basically going there for their convalescence, their final days. And so the nuns there kind of care for these elderly nuns and I think priests, I can't remember, elderly nuns for sure.
Nuns for sure, yeah.
And that's kind of their role is what they do. And so she was personally plucked out of a lottery of potential nuns to go there, and that's going to be where she takes her final vows and starts to work in this very secluded convent in the middle of nowhere in Italy. And once she goes there, of course, it's a horror film, so strange things start happening. But the strangest thing, which, again, this happens in the trailer, and I already mentioned in the intro, she starts getting sick. She starts feeling, not well. They do a checkup on her, and the doctor of the facility, because again, it's basically a assisted living facility, more or less. The doctor there discovers that she is pregnant with child. And of course, their first instinct is like, this girl was doing some, naughty stuff on the side.
Breaking them vows.
She wasn't being a nun. She wasn't being very nunnery. And they find out that, not to get like crude or anything, but they literally say like her hymen was still intact. She was very much still a virgin, and she still is a virgin, yet she's somehow pregnant. Immediately that shifts the gear into, this is exactly what it sounds like, an immaculate conception. She was a virgin birth, virgin pregnancy, much like Mary with Jesus. And so that puts her into a whole other category in this nunnery, in this convent. And that's where things start to really go haywire in this movie. And you realize there are some really dark things happening inside this convent. Now, I can't get to what those things are without getting into spoilers. But they again, I mentioned, they go hard in this movie. This is not for the faint of heart. Like, be clear about that. Like, this is not a movie for the faint of heart. And because Sydney Sweeney's in it, I hope that the audience that goes sees this, as you mentioned, like the Euphoria crowd, the Anyone But You crowd, even the Madam Web crowd, go in with an open mind, is all I'm saying. Go in with an open mind, because while it does go hard, it's a really well done story. And this is ultimately, and I mean this as a compliment, by the way, Patrick, and I think you'll agree with me, this is ultimately a real performance piece for Sydney Sweeney. And boy, does she live up to everything. I've heard criticisms of Sydney Sweeney, people saying, she's not a great actor, she's okay, she's just hot, whatever. Bullshit. Watch this movie and tell me when you walk out of there that this woman is not going to one day win some awards. She kills it in this movie in every way, shape, or form. Not to spoil our best performance category coming up in a little bit, but this is a Sydney Sweeney performance piece, and she absolutely kills it.
Yeah, I think anyone who goes, oh, she's not all that, it's just they just like her because she's pretty. She's multi-time Emmy nominated, by the way. So she's been Emmy nominated for White Lotus and for Euphoria, if I'm not mistaken. And both those shows are like Emmy award-winning shows, and she's a heavy hitter. And you got to deal with it. We're dealing with kind of like a savant, you know what I mean? Somebody who really knows what they're doing. And just because they're 20 something years old, you know, some people might dismiss that. Nah, she's got the chops. And I think what was really cool was, you're right, this is a performance piece. And I think that's why she championed it 100%, because she was like, well, here I am in Hollywood and I can actually like focus my career a little bit. I remember that piece so well, and I remember how much I wanted to do it. Here's a chance for me to just show my shit, show you what I can do. And it's very much an acting piece for her. It's very much a centerpiece for her, and she pulls it off. She really does. We'll get into more why about that later. Another thing that I love, and I'm curious, this is something, this is more in the weeds, in the horror weeds, I would say, is that I wasn't hearing any interviewers ask her about folk horror. But in my opinion, Damon, I think this is like classic folk horror. And I'm not the biggest fan of folk horror. I watch it and I go, okay, like it's all right. I just watched one recently the other day. I think it was called The Cult or something like that. Another like late 60s, early 70s kind of English countryside type shit. Very, very like very much in that vein, very much in that language, but just updated and I think tweaked to actually make it really palatable, which that might sound like a backhanded compliment. It's not. I think folk horror is like very much an acquired taste. Like if you like haggis, like go for folk horror. I'm not a big haggis guy. Okay, it's not your thing, not mine. I'm not going to yuck your yum, right? This was a folk horror that I actually got down with, but it was very folk horror in its language, which is sophisticated. Like her and director Michael Moen had to have, and I believe she picked him because of his pitch deck that he threw back to her. She saw it and she was like, yes, all this imagery, this stuff was in my head. So even if she didn't have knowledge of folk horror, I'm sure he pitched her some folk horror imagery, because that tends to deal with religious, tons of religious and occultist aspects. And this movie does that as well. So you get a modern folk horror that's really fucking good. Like, I mean, in terms of execution, we'll talk about whether it's a good movie or not in the spoiler section, but this is a folk horror I would revisit, if that makes any sense.
So I'm kind of with you where I'm not the biggest folk horror fan, although I do like some folk horror. And it's weird because a lot of folk horror does center around cults. I mean, that's really what a lot of folk horror centers around. You think about The Wicker Man, you think about Midsommar, you think about even films like Dead and Buried, which is not truly straight up folk horror, but about a cult. You get into those kind of movies, you're dealing with that. That's I would say very generally a folk horror story. Now, weirdly, I have an odd obsession with cult stories. I've read a lot of books. I'm reading a book currently by an author named Anya Alburn called Within These Walls, which is about a cult and a very like almost like a Jim Jones style cult in the 80s, where a cult leader, almost like a Manson style cult leader, leads his flock and they all commit suicide together, and then one member gets killed. And so this is like an investigation into that years later, not to spoil the book. But I love cult stories. Weirdly, I got weirdly obsessed in the last couple of years watching all the documentaries and books about the Nixium cult, that weird sex cult with that Keith Raniere guy who got sent to prison for the rest of his life, thankfully. I do, but folk horror, it's kind of weird. I have a bit of a disconnect. I like cult stories, but folk horror doesn't always do it for me. And I think it's been well documented on this show. I used to despise Midsommar. We did a review for it. I rewatched it, and I was like, you know what? It's actually pretty good. But generally speaking, I'm not one that like loves folk horror, and I don't really revisit a lot of folk horror. But I do understand and agree with where you're going to say that this is kind of that folk horror. This is going to piss off some of the religious crowd, but when you deal with hardcore religion in any fashion, Christianity or on down the line, you are dipping into folk horror, because that's really what folk horror is about an obsessive cult. I'm not trying to offend you by saying your religion is obsessed with cults. I'm saying that that's kind of where that's where you lead into. Now, to be fair, and this is to the religious folks out there, this is ultimately a movie. You know what I mean? Like we would hope there's not actually a convent doing stuff like this in real life. But the point is, and that's films. Films are extremes. Like that's the point of films. Films are extremes. I was just joking about this with my colleagues at my actual day job today. We were talking about Euphoria, the show that Sydney Sweeney stars in, and somebody said, "Is it worth checking out? I haven't seen it." And I said, "It's incredible. It's a great show, but it's not like any real high school. Like you would never, there's no real high school where the things that happen in Euphoria happen in real life. And he kind of laughed and he's like, I get it, because he's like, I actually like was a Pretty Little Liars. And he's like, I like that show. And it's bonkers. It's not real. So you have to take it with a grain of salt, even with folk horror. You have to understand that while weird, bizarre things like this do happen, like the Nixium cult, like Jim Jones, that's the extreme. That's the far reaches of that fanaticism. That's kind of where Immaculate falls in here, is where it is folk horror because you're dealing with a cult. But it does it in a way that it's really smart and intelligently approaches it. And the story here, and that's going to require us to get into spoilers, because ultimately what the story starts out as is this nun Cecilia has basically an immaculate conception where she gets pregnant without ever having sex. And so the entire sect of nuns and priests and everyone at this convent more or less start treating her like a deity in a way. Like she is held in such high regard because she is the new Virgin Mary, more or less. And everyone believes this is a miracle beyond miracles. Some of the nuns are a little jealous of her. Everyone know when she walks in, it's like Moses parting the Red Sea. She just walks in, it's like that kind of room. It's not until later, which we're going to have to get into spoilers, that she finds out what's actually happening. And that's when the story takes a twist. And when that happened, I went from this is a pretty good movie to I really like this movie. And that was the moment for me. When that twist is revealed, again, we have to get to spoilers, talk about that. When that happened, I was like, damn, well done.
Yeah, we might as well start spoilers, Damon. I mean, what else is there to say other than like I want to start talking about why this movie is very interesting to me.
So yeah, go see Immaculate. It's in theaters now. Obviously, we're releasing this episode a week after it came out because, as we mentioned on past episodes, there were a lot of movies that dropped in the same weekend, so we had to kind of go in order. So we did Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire first, and now we're doing Immaculate. So it's already in theaters. Go see it. If you can't tell by our review already, Patrick and I both really enjoyed this film. So yeah, go see it. It's in theaters right now. So now we are going full spoilers. So if you haven't seen Immaculate, just be aware we are going to go all the way into this plot. Patrick, please, the floor is yours, sir, to talk about why this film fucks around and finds out.
Yeah, Damon. No, now growing up Catholic, I don't know about Baptist, but I know growing up Catholic, the only person that was more as important as Jesus was Mary. His mother, Mother Mary, the Virgin Mother, was so important. I mean, I don't know how many guys I knew that had a Virgin Mary tattoo on their body growing up. Such an important icon in the Catholic Church. Super, super important icon in the Catholic Church. And this is what drew me in, because I know how important she is. When I saw in the trailer the imagery, which some people who didn't grow up with this might not recognize, they adorned her in similar clothing as the Virgin Mary. They did her hair a certain way. They started to treat her like the Virgin Mary. That drew me in as a former Catholic, going, oh wow, they're going to go down that road. She's so important to the religion that is Catholicism. I was like, where is this gonna go? Well, Damon, it's a horror movie. We know it's gonna go south. That's where we know it's going. So how does it go? This pregnancy at first is of course shocking, but then it gets weird. She's not just getting sick, like she's getting like weird sick, and even she's like, I know I don't know what's going on, but I know something ain't right. And when the priest and the doctor are both like, hey, you know what? You're just going to stay here with us. Don't worry about being sick. If you get out there into the world, it could be dangerous. Like they're trying to kind of comfort her, but she's like, oh, this fucking feels weird. I don't know. This doesn't feel right. And her, she's got this little relationship going with Father Tedeschi, where they seem to have a little bit of a rapport. There's always the repressed sexuality of Catholicism. That's always a huge part of it. And that's laced throughout the first part of the movie. So she wants to trust him, and they share secrets and stuff. They have sort of a kinship, but her only friend, Sister Gwen, she's not really part of all of this. She just did it to get away from a terrible life. So she just decided to join the convent to do that. But you start to realize that every woman there that's a young nun has been selected, and they call themselves what, broken birds or something like that, birds with broken wings or something like that. And Gwen, since she's way more street savvy, and you can tell they do great character work, and you realize Cecilia, Sydney Sweeney's character, is certainly more sheltered. Gwen was not. Gwen was from the streets. And Gwen goes, I know a man lying when I see one. Something is fucking off here. Damon, do you want to tell him what's so off here? Because that dread, that just when it starts ratcheting up, you're like, what is wrong here? What's really going on here?
So early in the film, when Cecilia first goes in, they give her a tour of the facility of the convent, and in this one very special room, there's this nail, this giant nail encased in glass, and they hand it to her, and they tell her that this is actually a nail that they've discovered was one of the nails that you put through one of the hands or feet of Jesus Christ when he was crucified by the Romans and died on the cross. They discovered this nail, and this is actually the nail that went through one of Jesus's feet or wrists or whatever when they crucified him. And so it's like a huge, huge religious like icon symbol, basically. And when Sydney Sweeney's character Cecilia touches it, she ends up passing out. And when she wakes up, that's when all the weird stuff starts to happen. Now, I'll be honest, Patrick, when I saw the trailer and I went into the thing and that in the film and this started happening, I was convinced with absolute certainty. And by the way, I'm not patting myself on the back with this, because trust me, I told you how stupid I was watching stop motion. Generally speaking, I'm pretty good at sussing out a plot. Like, I'm a writer. That's my job. And if there's one, like, I still enjoy films, but like, I would say 8 times out of 10 in a mystery kind of thriller, I figure out the plot before the ending. Now, does it ruin my movie watching experience? Actually, no, I kind of enjoy it. I'm like, ooh, I was right. I do get it wrong. Like, I didn't see Kaiser Soze coming in Usual Suspects when I saw that when I was in college. But generally speaking, I'm pretty smart at sussing out a plot. This one I was convinced was some sort of supernatural chicanery. And my thought going in was this is some sort of weird, almost like a devil situation where it's like, almost like Rosemary's Baby. You know, and I know Sydney Sweeney said Rosemary's Baby was a huge influence on this movie. And if you go see this, a lot of people have called this like an updated version of Rosemary's Baby. And I would say that's a pretty accurate portrayal. But in Rosemary's Baby, sorry, spoilers, 50 years after the fact, it was basically she was impregnated by the devil and born the Antichrist. That was what Rosemary ended up having, was the Antichrist. And so I went in thinking it was going to be that kind of supernatural, creepy devil thing. It's going to turn into that, you know? It's not that at all. What you come to find out is they believe with 100% accuracy that this nail contained very small traces of DNA of the real Jesus Christ, the real Jesus. And they basically contained and got that DNA and then grew it more or less. Like they spawned it off and they did it. And now what they're doing is, for the past however many years, I think they said like 20 years, Father Tedeschi was a biologist and a geneticist before he found God. He came to this convent, and now his job is to perform experiments and basically create a second savior. He wants to impregnate a nun with the DNA that they believe belongs to Jesus Christ, and they want to create a second savior. They want to basically almost like they're trying to bring about the end of the world, because in the Bible, the coming of Christ means the world is ending. Like, that's what the book of Revelation says. So they never get too deep into that part of like why they're doing it, but they're basically like, the world is ruined. We want Jesus to come back, and this is how we're going to create a new Jesus, is their plan. When you find out that it's a twisted, distorted science that they're working with here, that totally flipped everything on my head, because I thought I knew where this was going. This was some weird supernatural chicanery. No, this was religion parading itself as religion and belief and faith, but really they were using science to create their solution. they were like, we're going to create our own Christ child in these, and so throughout all these years, every version of this experiment has failed miserably. Nuns have died. The babies have all been just, I mean, that's part of the like really messed up part of this movie. Like they've all been like, distorted and just really like really horrific creatures that never were born, never actually born into this world. But through time and effort, they've continued to experiment, and now they believe once Cecilia gets pregnant, she's made it further along in her pregnancy than anybody else. She gets to the third trimester, and they are convinced she is going to bear the new Christ. When they kind of injected that scientific twist, I was like, you got me. What a brilliant way to do this. Because I thought with absolute certainty there was going to be some weird supernatural twist in this movie. Not at all. It is basically a geneticist who becomes a priest is experimenting to try to create a new Christ, which sounds messed up. And when you watch the movie, it is messed up.
It is. It's creepy, and it's occultish, right? It's like, I think like even the Catholic Church probably would be up in arms. They'd be like, we would never do that. Wink, wink. We're definitely not trying to do that at the bottom of the Vatican. That's definitely not happening. You know what I mean? But like, because it's perverting their mythos, their mythology to like force it on somebody. That wouldn't work. In fact, it would birth a heretic if you really think about it. Like that they did something heretical. But these guys are so obsessed and they're so sure that this relic contains the DNA of Christ. They don't know. They found a fucking nail. They have no idea what's on that nail. They really don't. And it's clear their experiments over the years have been tragically bad. And they don't know what's going to come out of this Sydney Sweeney, but they're certainly sure that if she carries the baby to term, it is for certain going to be the next coming of Christ, and they can declare that. And that's actually where the movie could get into a bit of plot holes if they really wanted to. If you really wanted to like dig deep and go, well, wait, why didn't they why not involve the Vatican? Okay, so they're obsessive occultists who think they're above it all and they're trying to do it this way or whatever. There's ways to kind of find plot holes, but they sidestep all that to just go, how can someone pervert their own religion to the point that they do something evil? This is exactly what they're up to. They're doing something incredibly evil. They're taking these women and they're victimizing them, or they're targeting them because of their pasts, and they're going to try to do this to them. It's a very evil thing that just exists right here in the real world, and it shows what lengths some might go to for their dangerous obsession with religion. And I love that because there's a little cautionary tale in there. It's like, yo, be religious if you want to be, but don't go too hard with it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, kind of be cool to everybody. Don't go trying to make the second coming of Christ. You're going to make something else. Damon, that ending, she does birth this child, and it's so smart. And I'm curious if they ever had a version where they cut to the child. They don't ever do it. You just hear the gurgling and the breathing, and something doesn't seem right, and you're all on Sydney's face. Sister Cecilia looks down in horror at whatever she can see down there, and she has to do the unthinkable. And I don't even need to tell you. I'm sure you can put two and two together. But it's just like, look at what this perversion can actually do to people. It's super cool, and in the most fucked up way. It was like, that's a cool angle to put this in.
Well, let's just talk about the ending, because that's what a lot of people are talking about. Because Sydney Sweeney, after she escapes these catacombs underneath the convent and she does away with Father Tedeschi, who is, just 100% obsessed with her giving birth to this creature, whatever they impregnated her with. And she ends up killing him, and she escapes through the catacombs, almost like a Descent style exit, where she gets through like this little giant, this hole outside the catacombs, escapes, and then she gives birth to the baby. And there is a really hard scene at the ending where she's giving birth, and it's just a close up on Sydney Sweeney screaming for like 2 minutes straight. It feels like, I don't know how long it actually was, but she's just like these really intense guttural screams. and then she plops out whatever was inside of her, and we never see it. Now, I know I've seen some interviews with Sydney Sweeney talking about this. They did 3 takes of this finale, but the one in the film is the very first take they did. And from my understanding, the interviews I've read with her and with the director, Michael Moen? Is that his name?
Yeah, Moen. Yeah.
They've said that they never really intended to show what it was. They had like glancing shots, but they wanted to leave the interpretation up to the audience, almost like what you see in Rosemary's Baby. When you see like Rosemary at the end of that, when she sees her baby, she's like, why does it have glowing eyes? What did you do to its eyes? What did you do to its eyes? The mystery, the terror of that is like knowing that something is truly messed up going on with her baby. That's kind of what they do here, where they don't show you. You hear this weird gurgling sound, and you never hear crying or like a normal sound of a baby being born. And there's this really intense moment where she literally bites through the umbilical cord to separate herself from this creature. And then she picks up a giant rock, and goodbye, creature. Let's just put it that way. And everyone's talking about that scene because it's so intense and so shocking that, like, she doesn't embrace this child. She's like, this is an abomination and it needs to die. And that's literally how the film ends. I would say the ending works perfectly. And what it does in a lot of ways is it gives her the autonomy to control her body again, because they did this to her. And she takes back control by saying, no, you're not going to do this to me. When she sees this thing, which is clearly not a normal baby, she's like, this thing can't come into the world. Even if it's any semblance of a normal creature, these wackadoos cannot be allowed to hold this thing up and say, this is the new Christ, because that's exactly what they're going to do.
Yeah.
So she just says, I'm being done with this thing. This isn't my baby. This is a creature they put inside of me. I'm putting an end to this, which is exactly what she does. And to a larger extent, and this comment might piss off some people, and I promise you I'm not saying this to piss off some people, it thumbs its nose in the face of religion in that moment, because this wasn't truly, true faith in religion, and again, I'm not a religious person, but true faith in religion is built around faith. You have faith that things are going to happen for you or to you based upon God, right? Like, that's the entire point. Like, you don't have to depend, and we could get into a whole philosophical conversation of like, you get healed by the doctor, you thank God, not the doctor, like that kind of thing. I'm not getting that philosophical debate. But you had that faith that God had some hand in you being cured. Okay, fine. That's okay. But what this film does by showing you how these priests did this to her, they didn't have faith.
Yeah.
They didn't have faith that Christ was actually coming back. They're just like, we're going to create this. We're going to make it happen. And to that point, that's why I think, like, for all the religious folks that have a problem with this film, I think if you really focus in on what this movie's saying, you'd probably agree with it, because the people who are doing this are not of your faith. They are not saying, we believe in Jesus, we believe in Christ, we believe in the second resurrection. They're saying, we don't believe in that, so we need to create it. We need to make it happen. We're going to force this to happen. That's not what your religion says. So the fact that Sydney Sweeney's character Cecilia just ends this is really the only way this movie could have ended. And it is, as everyone says, as shocking but also as brilliant as you've heard.
I think her doing that and destroying the abomination, we'll call it, is actually a weird little defense of faith. Because, and I know some very deeply religious people. They don't even like to call what their relationship with Christ like a religion. They don't even like that. They go, it's my faith. I have my faith in Jesus. She had faith in God and Jesus because what she considers a miracle. She was trapped under ice as a child. She died for however many minutes and she was brought back. So to her, that's miraculous. She was dead and then she was alive. She believed God had a hand in that. When she sees that God had no hand in what happened to her at this convent, that goes completely against faith. And you do have to smash that. You do have to knock that down. If what's important to you is faith, that there was no faith in that at all. That was perversion. That was perversion of it, of the idea of faith, which is to let me instead of letting God handle this, we'll handle it, and then we'll just lie to people and tell them it's faith. Tell them it's the miracle. She smashes that idea that religion can be manipulated for something evil, for someone else's grand designs for control, which is exactly what Father Tedeschi and these mysterious cloaked in red nuns or priests or whoever they were that kind of littered themselves throughout the trailer and the movie. They were perverting this idea. So you're right. Religious people should, as horrific as it is, understand that there is, at least for my interpretation as someone who grew up in this type of religion, these people were trying to pervert faith. They were trying to falsify it. That's as evil as it gets. So yeah, when people go up in arms about this, I go, but see the movie first. It's a tough watch especially if you're not into horror. It's a tough watch. But it's kind of saying, hey, like, if it ain't real faith, I'm not fucking with it. And I can fuck with that.
Yeah, that's what I said. Like, I think that if you really think about it, like, you can say, like, this isn't my religion. You're absolutely right. Like, this isn't, like, you would hope this isn't anyways. And so, right. Yeah, like, you should embrace the fact that this is a sect, a cult of people calling themselves Christians or Catholics who are perverting your religion and saying that we don't believe that Christ is actually coming back on his own. So we're going to, it's almost like we're going to force him to come back through this conception. So yeah, like, that's why I say, like, embrace it, because in reality, you pretty much agree with what Sydney Sweeney does in this film. Like, she's a very faithful woman. She loves God. She believes in God. But what they did to her was not God. What they did to her was not religion. And so that's why, again, you can find anger in anything, and if you believe in something, you can get angry that they're perverting what you believe it is. But ultimately, I think this is actually a weirdly profound statement of, like, religion that's been perverted for the wrongdoing. And I think you can go to, this is no different than when somebody carries out a horrific act in the world, in the real world, and they do it in the name of religion, and then every actual person involved with that religion denounces it and says, that's not our faith. Right. Right. This is no different. This is no different. This is no different than when an atrocity gets carried out in real life. I'm not going to sit there and name all of them. We all know what we're talking about. And every actual person involved with that faith says, this is not what our faith stands for. We do not stand for killing or maiming or doing all these horrific things. That's kind of what Immaculate's saying. Like, this is not this is not true faith.
It was not why she was there. It had nothing to do with her character's intentions. Sister Cecilia was there to devote her life to God. Like, she took her vows. She did it all. She meant it. Some people like her friend, they didn't necessarily mean it. She meant it. And so what she stumbled upon was an absolutely evil group of people who targeted her to take advantage of how actually faithful she was. You could, if you wanted to, argue and spin this movie as a pro-religion movie. That if you follow faith to its letter, you are the righteous one, or at least the humble one that is doing the proper work, and there are others who pervert it. Now that's where people in power go, oh, you're kind of challenging my thing, which is my thing is to manipulate this religion to my benefit. Those people are usually the loudest at pushing back. Catholic Church. You know what I mean? Like, there are certain just, people in power who don't like any sort of truth to power. They get upset about it because they go, oh, let's start taking a dig at our gig. I don't want anyone digging on what we do, which is we pervert this for our own personal gain. That's exactly what these people were doing. That's what Tedeschi and these red nuns or whatever they were up to. They were just trying to get their own shit going. So she smashed all that. I mean, pretty sophisticated shit right there. Like, really, it really is. And that's you're right. When that final sequence took hold, I said, this was a good movie. Now it's great.
Yeah. It reminded, it's kind of like when I say it kind of thumbs its nose in the face of religion. It reminds me of that scene from that movie, the Oscar-winning movie, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, where a priest comes to Frances McDormand's house to, like, tell her to take down the billboards, where she's basically calling out the sheriff for not solving the crime of her daughter's rape and murder. And she's basically like, she goes on that whole speech where she says, "You're culpable." As a Catholic church, she brings up like, the Catholic priests who have been, found guilty of molestation and things like that. And she says, you boys never really settled on that, but you're culpable. And if anyone is culpable with child, whatever it is, she's like, you don't have the right to tell me what to do and come down on me for what I'm doing. And she's got a point. Like, I know that angers a lot of religious people, but you're right. Like, you can't grandstand on her morality when you don't grandstand on the things going wrong in your own home. So I think that's kind of speaks to this here where, as I said, in a weird, twisted way, even as a non-religious person, I'm certainly not trying to convert the Catholics to loving Immaculate, but you could look at this and say, like, this isn't our religion, and that's why you should actually embrace this a little bit, because what Cecilia does in the end by killing the abomination is she's killing the idea that this particular sect of religious cultists have more power than God, because that's really what they're doing. They're saying we have the power to create a new Christ. We have the power of a resurrection. They're trying to play God. And she's like, no, the fuck you're not. And so stone, creature, dead.
I mean, very smart, sophisticated, subversive storytelling, Damon. So this movie gets high marks for the way it takes that on.
Absolutely. All right, let's get into categories and let's just play the spoiler here, Patrick. And we're going to talk about best performance. I don't want to degrade anyone's performance in this movie. It's a very well acted movie. Although I will make one very small minor complaint real quick. One of the major stars that was promoted in all the promotional material was Simona Tabasco, who played and got nominated for an Emmy in her role in The White Lotus. She was in the second season. Sydney Sweeney was in the first. So they both were in The White Lotus, different seasons. But if you go through a lot of the promotional material interviews, it was Sydney Sweeney and Simona Tabasco side by side doing interviews. And Simona Tabasco played a nun, Sister Mary, I think, or Sister...
Something like that, yeah.
And I was like, oh, cool. Like, I like Simona Tabasco. I thought she was great. And she actually is Italian. So I was like, she's going to be great in this movie. She's in it for 3 minutes. She's in the very opening and she dies and that's it. Like, I was like, that's it? Like, that's all we're going to see is Simona Tabasco and she's one of the main stars? Again, minor complaint, but that kind of bugged me. But best performance, Patrick, there's only one answer.
The answer is Sydney Sweeney, right? She set this whole thing up to show off what she can do. And the truth is, I saw it finally. I mean, I don't want to say that like Euphoria or White Lotus like pigeonholed her, but she plays. I think she skews young in those shows, naive. She's young and naive in Immaculate, but she's nuanced. She has reasons. She has a background, and I think she challenges kind of everything that's going on around her. Like very early on in the movie, there's this sort of like I said, sexual tension between her and Father Tedeschi, even between her and other nuns. Again, it's all about repressed sexuality and Catholicism and all that stuff. She plays it very sophisticated. She knows how to kind of navigate this field, and this was a kind of a coming out performance for her. Will everybody see that? Probably not, because I think a lot of people just don't watch horror movies and they're thinking, oh, okay, well, this is just another a horror cash grab from an it girl right now. So boring. No, it's a performance piece. It is 100% a performance piece. Sydney Sweeney knew what she was doing and she executed it very well.
This is the movie that transforms Sydney Sweeney from being the attractive it girl in Hollywood to being, in my opinion, a serious actor. Now, I'm saying that knowing that she's already been a serious actor. Like,
yeah,
she's great in Euphoria. She's been nominated for Emmys in Euphoria. She's fantastic in that show. But as you said, she's kind of gotten pigeonholed a little bit where she's like the really attractive girl, the really pretty girl. And those are the roles people kind of continuously see. They sexualize her.
Yeah.
Talked about that in public. Where like people have really odd, constant opinions on her body. People who should have no opinions whatsoever on her freaking body. But people love to comment on it. People love to just sexualize her for everything she does. This movie goes in the complete opposite direction. She's playing a nun. She's very covered up for the majority of this movie, and she's playing a virgin who has an immaculate conception. This is while you mentioned there is like this repressed sexuality, which is kind of a constant theme in Catholicism. Sorry to offend the Catholics, but it's true. That's kind of where she just breaks out of that. I need to be the I could be a good actor, and you can't sexualize me for this role. You cannot sexualize her for this role in any way, in my opinion, any way, shape, or form. Like, they don't do the she's all that with her and make her like try to try to ugly her up for the sake of making. But she's like a very plain, just kind of a mousy girl who loves God. And then these horrific things start happening to her. And once the horrific things start happening to her, she is thrown into a turmoil of emotions throughout this film. This, to me, was the film that Sydney Sweeney made as a performance piece, as we mentioned earlier. This is the movie where she's like, okay, you think you know me? Watch this. Yeah. And that's really what she does in this movie. Watch what I can do. And that's what Immaculate is.
And not only is she a great actor, Damon, she's clearly a great producer. I mean, they updated this script to have this new take on it and everything. And now she's somebody that I'm going to pay very close attention to, because I was always like, I'm waiting for Euphoria season 3 like everybody else. But I wasn't like, I didn't run out and go see her rom-com just because it's Sydney Sweeney. I really didn't, like if she's in something that I'm interested in, cool. Now seeing that she fostered this, that she fostered the script to make it what it is, that she worked at every single aspect of this movie. Now, whenever Sydney Sweeney does something, I'm going to sit up and take notice. Another person that I do that with, we mentioned earlier, is Margot Robbie, who is a producer on more things than you realize. Some things she's not even in them. She's a producer. So now I just look at her upcoming producer checklist and I go, what is she fostering out there? Because she's got a great eye for a good script, for a good story. Sydney Sweeney's got that too. So not only on the performance category, but best producer also goes to Sydney Sweeney.
I also want to make one thing real clear. Like, Sydney Sweeney, the choices she's made in her films, whether she's like, sexualized herself in films, that's her choice, by the way. Like, she can do whatever she wants. I want to be clear about this. I don't think this is like she's had choices put upon her. Like, she's chosen to take the role she's taken, and she's been great in everything I've seen her in. Now, have I seen everything she's done? No, but I have seen a lot. I've seen Euphoria. I saw The Voyeurs. I've seen, unfortunately, I didn't see Madam Web, but I did see this. But what I'm getting at is, like, I want to be clear. Like, I have no problem that Sydney Sweeney does roles where she's sexy and attractive. There's nothing wrong with that. She makes those choices. But the fact that she did this movie and said, okay, I'm going to go the complete opposite route. And I'm going to show you that I can do a movie where I could just kick ass, take names, and be amazing, and you're not going to be able to sexualize me. Because I think that's the problem, is people take away from her performance by sexualizing her too much. They'll say, oh, she's in Euphoria, but she's the hot girl in Euphoria. No, she's a good actress who just also happens to be attractive in Euphoria. Don't get lost in, and you mentioned Margot Robbie's a great case of that as well. Like, don't get lost in, like, just because she's an attractive woman, that she's not smart enough to fucking know better what she's doing. And I think that's what Sydney Sweeney's doing with this film. And she's like, okay, hold on now. I think Margot Robbie did that with I, Tonya, where she went out and did something that had nothing to do with her looks, had nothing to do with her style, any of that. She went out and made that movie. And there's even a great line in Barbie, which I saw Barbie. Like, there's a great line in Barbie. It's a really funny line in Barbie where she's crying and breaking down, and there's like a pause in the movie, and you hear the voiceover. They're like, by the way, to the producers, choosing Margot Robbie as the one crying and trying to make her like ugly cry in the scene was not the right choice. They kind of make fun of themselves. Yeah. They're like, Margot Robbie cannot be ugly. Like, you cannot make Margot Robbie look bad. But it was a funny line, and obviously I'm sure, Margot Robbie had a hand in that and had a good joke at that one. But that's kind of like this. Like, Sydney Sweeney is saying, like, she makes her own choices, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't begrudge her for making choices where she's showing her body or she's showing that she's attractive. There's nothing wrong with that. I think this choice was, though, saying I can still do other things, and I'm taking away your weapon where you're going to say I'm just this attractive girl, and that's all you're gonna think of me as. You're not going to look at the performance. That's a mistake. do not underestimate Sydney Sweeney, I guess is my point.
Absolutely, and I think there's even like some subtextual theme in the movie that these people are definitely treating her as a vessel. They only see her as a vessel for what they want, right? And that's parallel to a lot of women's careers in Hollywood. You know, you are just the thing we are going to put in on the screen to look pretty, to give us some production value. Like there is something about that in this script as well that I'm sure like she made sure kind of came to the forefront, because it's all over the interactions with her and the people in the in power in this movie, the people that oversee this convent. It's pretty fascinating how sophisticated this movie is for, like I think for you and I it's not a surprise. Horror movies can be incredibly sophisticated with their commentary, and this movie is amongst those kind that it can make a really strong statement.
I think we're entering a new age, and I hope we are entering a new age with women in acting. But you remember there was that documentary a few years ago, like I can't remember. I think I want to say it was called "Whatever Happened to Deborah Winger," and Deborah Winger was like an incredibly good, famous actor in the '80s. She did movies like Urban Cowboy, Officer and Gentleman. She was like all over the awards, and then she turned 40 and suddenly stopped getting cast in anything, because she was no longer the hot, attractive, younger actor. She got a little older, and so like now, and then there's that transition where you went from being the hot, younger woman to being like the grandmother. There was no in between where you could just have nuanced roles for women in their 40s. And there was a huge discussion around that in Hollywood where a lot of actors, just like Barbara Hershey was another one, where she just stopped getting cast because she was no longer the young, hot, young actor. And I think I really hope we've gone beyond now. Certainly there's still problems. I'm sure you've seen articles recently from Olivia Colman talking about pay disparity and things like that. But I think this is an example where we're seeing women take power and control, like what Margot Robbie's done and what Sydney Sweeney is doing here, where they're taking control of their career and they're saying, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to make my movie, and this is my choice. And I think that's where we're transitioning now to a much smarter, hopefully smarter Hollywood, where we're no longer going to have a Deborah Winger who turns 30 or 35 and can no longer find roles. I know that's a weird transition, but I think that speaks to the larger issue of like people trying to pigeonhole or try to figure out who Sydney Sweeney is just based upon the fact that she's been young and attractive in a lot of movies, not giving her credit for being a good actor on top of that.
Yeah, that's the old way of thinking. Like, this is all you're good for. You're just good for looking good and on camera. It's like, no, dude, not only am I more than that, like I can actually make better stuff than what you're putting out. Because, I mean, listen, if you and I are going to be honest, horror doesn't have a great history of how it treats women. And we've only had to keep improving and improving and improving. And the way you improve that is you actually get women involved in the storytelling process. You don't just hire them. You don't just make them hired guns for your horror movie. Get them involved. Get them involved at producerial level. Get them involved in the writing level. Get them involved in the directing level. So that way, these are movies that actually hold up over time. And I think this one will.
Absolutely. Let's move on to our next category, and that is the Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP Award. Of course, this is the movie. This is the award.
Speaking of sexualizing, here comes the banana hammock.
Yes, this is where we sexualize the great character actor Ken Foray. In the movie From Beyond, he jumps down a flight of stairs and goes to a basement with a butcher knife to save the world wearing nothing more than a thong bikini. We could not imagine a better name for our award than the Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP Award. So, Patrick, when it comes to, here we are sexualizing, talking about that. When it comes to Immaculate, who is your MVP award for this movie?
My MVP goes to cinematographer Alicia Christian, who has worked with Sydney Sweeney in the past. Part of her, producerial role was to make sure she got the right filmmakers in place, and she did handpick her cinematographer based on their experience, based on working together, based on a working relationship. Because what Alicia does here is give this a very sort of soft tone. I mean, there's like science and art all kind of collide at cinematography. And I think I've said it on past episodes. The cinematographer is like making the movie, the art designers and the production designers, they come in, and the wardrobe and everything. But the cinematographer has to kind of make it all ingest into that lens. It's a super 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 important role, and this movie is so very sophisticated on the cinematography level that I had to give the MVP this time to Alicia, because what a job to make a movie look this rich and good. And I feel like it's one of these movies that's going to hold up as looking really good over a long period of time.
So when I got your categories for tonight, I thought about it, and the cinematography in this movie was good. It didn't really blow me away early on, but where it really caught my attention was during the final 20 minutes when Sydney Sweeney's character is running through the catacombs of this underneath this convent where she's trying to escape the maniacal Father Tedeschi. And that's where the cinematography really captured my attention, because there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of dark corners, there's little shades of light kind of keeping you there. You got a flashlight that's just basically lighting the way. And if you remember, going back to another review we did for the Outwaters,
don't say it. Oh, you said the words. You said the heretical words, the Outwaters.
I did. And one of my biggest complaints about that movie was everything was lit with a pin light, like a pin light flashlight. And I'm like, hold on, come on now. We're in the 2020s now. No one has that little of a flashlight. It was so annoying. It bugged me beyond words, how everything was just lit by literally this little tiny pin light the size of a penny going across the screen. It annoyed the hell out of me. This movie is much more realistic. She's got an actual flashlight and she's going through the catacombs, and then there's fires and things like that. So that's where the cinematography really captured my attention in this movie. And I thought, I agree, it was really well done.
Yeah, just look good, look like a proper movie. And and this is a lower budget movie. It's not the lowest budget around, but it is lower budget. A lot of indie films, especially indie horror films, can't afford great cinematography, and this one has it.
So for me, the MVP award, originally I was just going to let's just give it to Sydney Sweeney because this is her baby and this movie doesn't get made if not for Sydney Sweeney. And that's really the answer. But we've already, I think at this point we've pretty much, heaped every ounce of praise possible onto Sydney Sweeney for what she did both in and around this movie. So I'm going in a different category, and I'm going to go for the MVP, and I'm going to go with Neon as the studio. Neon, as I mentioned, is kind of becoming the new A24, where they are an indie studio that's championing a lot of up-and-coming horror. And also, by the way, we mentioned A24, we mentioned Anatomy of the Fall, didn't even think about this. Neon also produced Parasite, which was an Academy Award-winning film. So
swept the Academy Awards. Yeah, ate them all up one year.
So when I say new A24, I'm saying newer in the horror realm. They weren't necessarily producing a ton of horror films, but what they have coming up in 2023 and 2024 is pretty incredible. They got Immaculate coming out now. They also produced Longlegs, which is a movie that everyone's buzzing about. Micah Monroe and Nicolas Cage coming out in July. Everyone's talking about that one. That's going to be a big one. They also produced a new film called Cuckoo, which stars Hunter Schafer, of course, who is Sydney Sweeney's co-star in Euphoria. Dan Stevens is in that movie. I saw the trailer a couple times this week, so I went to the movie several times this past week. They're producing that one. They got a lot of horror. So where I'm giving the MVP award is that Neon is not only an indie studio, but they are becoming a horror studio. A24 was kind of the opposite. They kind of started out as horror, and then they kind of transitioned to where they do a little bit of everything. Now, A24 definitely still does a lot of horror. Of course, they produced and picked up and bought our favorite horror film of last year, Talk to Me. Of course, they're well known for Hereditary, Midsommar, a lot of other great films. But that's kind of where they got known early, was horror, and now they've transitioned into just becoming a powerhouse indie studio and producing huge Oscar-winning films. Neon, to me, was kind of the opposite. They were producing indie darlings that became Oscar-winning films like Parasite, and now they're dipping more and more into horror. When you have Immaculate, Longlegs, and Cuckoo coming out in the same year, you're in. So, well done, Neon, for being all in on horror and embracing this genre.
It is one of the few places where I'm like, this capitalism thing ain't that bad. Because truth be told, they realize oh yeah, we love producing these Oscar darlings, and that does really great for our studio. But you also got to keep the lights on somehow. How do you keep the lights on? Oh, let's make horror movies, because horror movies are cheap to produce, and people go see them in droves. They make their money back. And so Neon goes, well, let's take our powers and let's take the lessons that A24 has learned and make some really good horror movies. Let's get the right cast in place. Let's get the right producers in place and the right scripts in place. They already have this sort of foundation of making quality movies. Now they can apply it to horror, and I think they did it really well here, and it gives me a lot of hope for Longlegs and Cuckoo. Based on what I'm seeing here, I'm going, okay, Neon is taking this serious. A lot of people called Parasite a horror movie, and in some respects, it does have horror elements to it. It's many more things than that. It's actually a great movie. If you haven't seen Parasite, go see it. It's really good. But yeah, Neon, super MVP.
And also, I want to mention, like, just to kind of throw out some of the other titles that people may not know about this. Like, they produced I, Tonya, which of course was the Margot Robbie, one of her early big champion films. They did what else have they done here? I'm looking through their list here. Honeyland, which was a well done movie. Parasite, as I mentioned, that won all the awards. Portrait of a Lady on Fire, that was
so good.
Now they did do horror. They did do The Lodge, which was a great horror film.
That's great. Yeah.
Years ago. They did that. They also produced Possessor, which was the Brandon Cronenberg film. So they have done horror. So I don't want to make it sound like they're just now getting into horror, but they produced the Billie Eilish documentary that came out. They got a lot of awards. They got a lot of mentions from Apple TV. They did Pig, which was one of our favorite films, the Nicolas Cage film.
Love that movie.
They did Titane, which I know a lot of people like to call that horror. I really didn't consider Titane horror. Maybe it is a little bit.
It's avant-garde. I mean, it's an art. I would call it like an art house psychological thriller, and not unlike a Love Lies Bleeding. Like I would put it in that category.
They did Spencer, which of course was the Kristen Stewart starring film about Princess Diana. Triangle of Sadness, which was a huge film that just came out fairly recently. They did Infinity Pool, which we reviewed on this film, or on this podcast. We did do that. So they have done horror, but it just doesn't feel like that. I mean, they did It Lives Inside, which I know is a film that came out that got a little bit of buzz. Anatomy of the Fall, which I mentioned. So they have done it. They did Ferrari, which was a Michael Mann film, which came out, and that's a big deal. So I don't want to make it sound like they've never done horror. But the fact that they're dedicating so much of their resources to horror now, like they're not just doing one-offs, they're doing like 3 films this year, and all 3 films are getting a lot of buzz. So that's kind of why I wanted to give them credit for that. So going through their list, maybe I misjudged them a little bit because they have done horror, but that's not what they've been known for. Like that's not really been their...
Right.
When people think of A24, typically they do kind of tend to think horror or Blumhouse, things like that. Even though Blumhouse also branches out and does a lot of other things. But I think
all the studios now, Damon, all the studios know where the fucking bread is buttered. It's in horror, dude, because we're going to show up. The horror fans are faithful no matter what. All ages, all styles. We're going to show up for horror. And these studios that, in my opinion, keep a very high bar for their movies, I very much want them as part of our roster, part of our tool set. Places like Neon and A24, because it just means we're just going to get more great horror to talk about.
Absolutely. Let's move on to our next category and let's talk about best scare, because this is obviously a horror movie and a pretty well done one at that. So Patrick, what was your best scare in Immaculate?
Damon, the best scare for me was just having to relive all of my little Catholic rituals in this movie. But truth be told, there is one, and my best scare, I call it "Got You in the Confessional." So she goes, when you're a nun, you have to go to confession like probably 3-4 times a week. I used to begrudgingly go like once a month, maybe. My mom would make me go. So I know what it's like sitting in that confessional booth, asking the priest for forgiveness for dumb sins like stealing a yo-yo or some shit like that. There's a moment where she's in this confessional and it's just getting a little too quiet, Damon. And you're like, what's really going to go on? What's going to happen here? And then bang, like straight out of like Friday the 13th, like these arms come busting through the confessional, like drag her out. And it's just sort of like a hallucination or something when she's passed out. But I thought it was a really good scare. I was like, whoa, hey, what the fuck? Hey, chill out. Okay. I didn't know we were doing jump scares in this movie.
Yeah, it was a really good, effective jump scare and well done, because it does get that like creepy quiet to it, and then boom, out of nowhere, jumps and grabs her out of the wall, and it is a hallucination, but it's a really well done jump scare. So for me, I had a couple choices, but the one I ultimately went with, which in the theater was the one that freaked me out the most, and it's actually hinted at in the trailer. I think yours is too, actually hinted at in the trailer. But mine was hinted at in the trailer. There's this scene where you see Sister Cecilia laying down in bed, and then you see like the shadowy figure behind her coming near her, and that's teased in the trailer. In the film, as we come to learn about this convent, as I mentioned, it's basically a convalescence home. It's an assisted living home where these elderly nuns are dealing with dementia and other. There's a great part early in the movie when Sister Cecilia is being shown around the convent by the one nun, Gwen, who's kind of like there almost like as necessity more than she actually wants to be there. And she's just like, be careful of this one. She's a biter. Like she's like telling you, like this is like this is like they're a lot of these nuns are not they're not in their right minds. Be careful. And there's a great scene where she falls asleep and you see the shadowy figure coming up from behind her with a pair of scissors. And the nun is like chopping off a piece of her hair. It scares the piss out of Sydney Sweeney. It scared the piss out of me in the theater too, because I was like, that was still at the point where I was like, this is something supernatural going on. In reality, it was just a demented nun who was just not well, and like she just cut a piece of Sydney Sweeney's hair off because she's part of this cult of people that believe like everything's happening for a reason, and like this is she's been sent there for some greater cause, whatever it is. But when that woman actually lunges at her with the scissors in bed, I was like, oh shit. And,
Yeah.
She ends up just cutting off a piece of her hair, but in that moment I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was like, hey, don't come at me so hard, nun. Nuns were scary growing up in a Catholic church. The nuns are scary. They have a reputation for being scary. So that always triggers something deep-seated in me. It's like, whoa, nun with scissors. Everybody back up.
Yeah, meanwhile, I saw Silent Night, Deadly Night when I was a child, and that scarred me forever for nuns. So, yeah, I wasn't Catholic, but that movie did it for me. Every time I hear the word Mother Superior, a chill goes down my spine. So, I get it. Let's talk about best gore. And as I said, this film goes hard. Mm-hmm. It goes hard, man. There's a lot of gore. There's a lot of blood in this movie. Patrick, what was the best gore in Immaculate?
You get a little tease of what's gonna happen in one of the trailers. She's walking through the courtyard and you can see a figure standing up on the top of the building. And sure enough, you know what's coming next is this character jumps, and I believe his sister Isabella, who actually had a problem, or Isabel, who had a problem with Cecilia because she wanted to be the anointed one. She actually knew what was going on, so she was even more sinister in some respects because she kind of wanted to be picked, and she knew that many girls before her had been picked to be the Immaculate Mother, and she was waiting for her turn. And when this new girl, Cecilia, ends up with the perfect child, she is beside herself. She tries to kill her, fails, and then in the next moment she's like, all right, well, fuck it, I'm just gonna fucking end it. She jumps off that building. Cecilia rushes over to look, and I wasn't ready for how they were gonna show her face. Her face is all like 6 ways of fucked up, like real fucked up, and super gory, super bloody. And I was like, damn, this movie fucking go hard.
Yeah, like they showed her face. I was like, damn, like that was the moment where I was like, okay, this movie's not fucking around. Like they're really going for it in this movie.
Yeah, they took like a ballistic gel face and just took a meat tenderizer to it. And I was like, oh my God, that doesn't look right.
Yeah, that was a great one. Again, I didn't see that coming because I was like, oh, they're going to roll her over. She's going to be dead. They rolled her over and they're like, oh, no, she's dead and she got rolled over by a truck at the same time. So it was pretty messy. My favorite gore, there's a lot of great bloody scenes, but I think my favorite was when Sydney Sweeney's character, Cecilia, finally figures out what's going on. And she goes back to the lab where they've been doing all these experiments, and she basically lays down all this flammable material. She ends up trapping Father Tedeschi in there and lights a flame, which is a great scene. It all goes ablaze, and you hear him screaming, and he's caught fire or whatever. But then you hear the sound of a fire extinguisher because smartly, which by the way, for future movies that make movies about flammable material around, everyone would have a fire extinguisher, by the way. That always bugged me when you see like cans of gasoline flying around and they're like, there wouldn't be a fire extinguisher anywhere in this place. There actually is a fire extinguisher. He puts out the fire and he escapes and comes after Cecilia. You don't really see him though. You just kind of see him lurking in the shadows, running through the catacombs. And when he finally catches up to her and throws her down and basically wants to force her to give birth to this thing, we see Father Tedeschi, and boy, did he get burnt up. And it's pretty gross. It's pretty gnarly when you see his burnt up, charred skin and everything. He's all bubbled up and you know,
Yeah.
hemorrhaging and gross blood, and it's disgusting. And he just looks 18 shades of fucked up.
Oh, he looks like a fucking freshly baked Neapolitan pizza. He's looking rough right there, and and then she proceeds to fucking stab him, and then a geyser of blood sprays all over her. Like, it's really awesome. Which, by the way, that was something she requested. She goes, "However we get to it, I need to be covered in blood by the end of this movie," and that's how they get to it. Where he's on top of her, trying to force the baby out, and she manages to stab him with the relic, with the nail right through the throat, and it just sends, I don't know, about 3 gallons of blood all over her. Fantastic. And the fact that Sydney was like, no, I need to be covered in blood by the end of this movie. Horror, like instant horror queen, because she orchestrated that. She's the architect of that. I mean, come on. I liked Sydney Sweeney before. Now I love her. Now it's like, okay, you're one of us. Welcome to the club.
Yeah, I need more blood. Come on, get me more blood here. I need more blood here. I'm like, all right, go for it, Sydney Sweeney, from this charred hot dog on top of you, because that's what he looked like. He looked like the hot dog you put over a fire for a little too long, and it becomes like blistered and gross and bubbled.
Yeah, he looked like a red dyed marshmallow being torched over the fire. He looked like shit.
He did not look good. And then, yeah, good for her, man. Blood everywhere. And that's when you see the photos you've seen all over the internet of her screaming in blood. That's not her blood. That's Father Tedeschi's blood.
All of it. Like, all quite literally all the liters of blood from his body.
Yeah. Every bit of Tedeschi is all over. You got a little Tedeschi on you, Sydney, let me tell you. Next category. I love this category, and I love when we do these. We're going to talk now about best religious horror. Now, I think it's been well documented on this show, Patrick, over the years. I'm not religious, just to restate the fact. But for weird reasons I can't explain, I always love religious tinged horror films. Maybe it's because for me, it's just scary fiction and not like sacrilegious to what some people take it as. I just think they're fascinating, and I've always enjoyed religious based possession films, things like that. This is a tough category, man. You really nailed it down to best religious horror film. I had to like eliminate like 30 different possibilities. So I'll allow you to go first. What is your best religious horror film?
Maybe it's considered cheating, maybe it's not, but my favorite is The Devils, which is actually a classic folk horror film. But I think, to me, The Devils is maybe a little bit more of like sort of a psychological drama. It's just one of those. Again, I think the folk elements are what catapulted into the horror category, because it is odd and strange and weird. But man, is it such a good movie. Have you seen The Devils?
I have not. You told me about it, but
dude.
I've never seen it.
Because I know you and I are Game of Thrones nerds. It's like watching, like, clearly they were like, oh, we're gonna make Game of Thrones, like we're gonna model it after The Devils. Because it's a very grounded movie that I believe is based on a somewhat true story from, I think, the 12th century. I don't know the exacts, but it's super, super interesting, super compelling performances. Really, Ken Russell directs. Really, really, really high quality movie where you just go, God damn, this is some good shit. But it is very much, I mean, to me, easily the best folk horror movie I've ever seen, and it deals very directly with religion. There's a nun and a priest, and there's a bunch of crazy shit that happens in the middle of all of it.
What is the actual story? Like, what is the plot of The Devils?
I think, I'm going to get it wrong because I don't have it committed to memory, but basically the King of France is kind of pissed that there's this one final kind of independent outpost ran by a renegade priest. And this renegade priest doesn't even really follow the religion, like the religion to the letter anymore. He's taken on lovers. And there's this psychotic nun who believes that they are meant to be together to, like, I believe, like, conceive Jesus or something like that. Like, she's completely off her rocker, but it's almost more of a drama because it's kind of about, the French government going, we need to shut this like outpost down. They're too independent, and this leader, he's too powerful. And that's kind of the catalyst of the whole movie. It's just so fucking compelling, so weird. Like, it's a weird, kooky ass movie, but it's so fucking well done.
Okay, I'll have to check it out. I remember we talked about it because I believe it dropped on streaming a while back. And
It was on Shudder for a while.
yeah, we had talked briefly about reviewing it, but it was just so obscure we decided not to review it. I remember you telling me about it, but I have not seen it, so I'll have to definitely check that out. So for me, man, I could have gone down a lot of different rabbit holes with this one because, immediately I thought, well, The Exorcist is the classic. That's an easy answer. Rosemary's Baby, which I know you're not a big fan of. I love Rosemary's
Not really.
Baby. I rewatched it fairly recently. Still holds up. I really enjoyed that movie. The Last Exorcism, I know I've mentioned that on the show before. That's a little smaller film. I really, really enjoyed that. But my answer ultimately came down to what is the one that I've rewatched the most that I love? And my answer for best religious horror film is none other than John Carpenter's classic, Prince of Darkness.
Nice.
Prince of Darkness is a classic 80s horror film about a group of scientists sent to an old church in Los Angeles that houses a dark secret. And what that dark secret is liquid Satan, more or less is the best way to say it. It's this giant canister with this swirling green material that is basically the embodiment of evil. And as you come to find out throughout the film, not again, this is spoilers for a film that's 40 years old at this point. Basically, you come to find out that this is like an alien, like an alien evil creature, more or less, and this is what becomes the embodiment of Satan. And Satan's son, who was going to take over the world, is locked in this container. And Jesus was an alien who was basically sent here to stop it. And so this Catholic Church has housed this dark secret for all these years, but now the evil is starting to leak out. And so these group of religious people and these group of physicists and scientists are sent there to try to figure out a way to stop it. And it is classic 80s. It is classic John Carpenter. I love everything John Carpenter's done, even some of his lesser loved films. I love Vampires. That's one of his more recent films. I even Ghost of Mars, which is not a great movie, but I still enjoy it to a certain aspect. When people talk about John Carpenter, generally they talk about Halloween. They talk about The Thing. Even in the Mouth of Madness, which is great. But I love Prince of Darkness. So that's my answer for my favorite religious horror. When you can have a movie where a woman types in the computer and says, you will not be saved by the Holy Ghost. You will not be saved by the God Plutonium. In fact, you will not be saved. I love that scene. So I go with Prince of Darkness.
Damon, do you know that Sydney Sweeney, one of her very first roles was a John Carpenter movie?
Really?
Yes. I'm trying to pull it up here. I think it's one of her first. The Ward.
Oh yeah. Oh okay. Yeah, you know what? I actually literally just picked that movie up on Blu-ray the other day. Funny enough.
Yep, she was in The Ward. That was actually her very first feature film.
Yeah, that has what's her name? The Johnny Depp's ex, the one that got Amber Heard. She's in
Amber Heard. That's right. Yeah. So she's in The Ward. That was her very first feature film.
I did not know that. I just bought it on Blu-ray the other day, so I guess I need to rewatch that. I've seen it, but I haven't seen it in years. Had no idea Sydney Sweeney's in it, so.
That's right. Yeah, she started in horror, and here she is now. Now she's one of the queens.
All the way back. All right, next category, and that is one of my favorites on this show, and that is remake, sequel, or leave it alone. This is where we take whatever movie we are reviewing and we theorize. Should they remake it? Should they sequelize it? Or should they just leave it alone? So when it comes to Immaculate, Patrick, are you remaking this? Are you giving it a sequel? Or are you just leaving it alone?
If this movie had ended differently, I would have said, let's go sequel. If for some reason that abomination would have stayed, then you could make arguments for a sequel that doesn't even have to involve Sydney Sweeney necessarily, or even just partially. She could foster some sort of a sequel. But since they ended it the way they ended it, to me, this is a very easy leave it alone. Now we've got a very updated folk horror movie that I would love to recommend to people. They go, oh, what kind of folk horror should I watch? I'd say The Devils, and I'd say Immaculate. I'm not calling Immaculate as good as The Devils. I'm just saying, if you like folk horror, I would start here. Start in these places. Maybe I'd throw Midsommar in there. If you want to get into folk horror, I think this is a great updated version of that.
You could, in a lot of ways with horror, even movies with finality, you could say, well, they could sequelize it in some way, shape, or form. And there is another version of this movie where they carry on You carry on maybe that they were actually doing these experiments across multiple convents, and you could just have a totally different, separate story. As you mentioned, doesn't even involve Sydney Sweeney. It's just a different, story of a separate convent carrying on these evil experiments. But I think ultimately the answer is leave it alone, because this is, I'm not going to say it's a perfect film, because it's not perfect. It's a really good film. I really enjoyed it. But the conclusion is so stunning and so shocking and so well done that you just feel like it would be, for lack of a better word, sacrilegious to carry it on, because
Nice.
it ends so well that you're like, I don't need to know what happens next. Like, yeah, could you be curious? Like, where does Sister Cecilia go from here? Sure, there's a curiosity there, but it ends with a great finality. Like, even Rosemary's Baby, when it ends and you realize that she gave birth to what these people believe is the Antichrist, you could be like, almost like The Omen, where you're like, what happens to Damien? What happens to that baby? In this one, we know what happens to the baby.
Oh, we know.
And so I don't think you need to go any further. I think that final shot of her dropping that stone and letting out the guttural scream is all you need. So end it and be done with it.
Yeah, I mean, why not have something just live on its own? I mean, I say that as a horror fanatic, which it just never happens, but this is a good opportunity to go ahead and do that.
Absolutely. So our last category is always, Patrick, and that is ultimately, is it scary? We are a horror movie podcast, so we got to answer that question. So when it comes to Immaculate, is this film scary?
Now, Damon, you and I can puff our chests and talk about our desensitization and the callus on our fingers, but truth be told, is this movie got both you and I with a proper jump scare. We both went, hey, like, we both did it. Like, so in that respect, it is a scary movie, but also on a whole other level, on a psychological level, it's a disturbing movie. It's an intriguing movie. There's certainly horrific moments, like we talked about with Isabel's face all mashed up. And there's plenty of other moments. I mean, there's a moment where he tries to cut the baby out of her belly. Like, holy shit. Like, it's an intense movie, a super intense movie. It's going to give some people like the scares, the tight chest and all that stuff. This is definitely a scary movie.
This is 100% a scary movie. I mean, there's a moment where Sister Gwen gets her tongue cut out.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, Father Tedeschi tries to perform his own C-section. But beyond that, once they realize that Cecilia is onto them and she knows that, like, basically she's in experimentation, they more or less torture this poor girl. Like, they brand her feet with crosses, which is horrific to watch. They torture her more or less at that point. That she becomes like very much their slave, not slave, but like their captive.
Yeah,
and it's horrific to watch. So this film works on a lot of levels. Are there good jump scares? Sure, there are good jump scares. Like I said, at least one got you and I, which is rare to happen. But beyond that, just the way that they treat poor Cecilia and then the atrocities that get carried out towards the latter part of this film, very scary. So this is absolutely an effective, scary horror film. And I think what I like most about it is it works on a lot of different levels. This is not just jump scare fest. This is not just gore fest. This is a little bit of everything. And I think that's why when this was over, I was like, damn, this film really surprised me.
I'm curious if this is going to end up on our list near the end of the year, because it's kind of got everything you need for a really good horror movie. And again, for us now, it's not about finding movies to scare the shit out of us, but those big points, if it does, we're looking for complete movies. And this feels very complete. Is it perfect? No, but it's damn well complete. It's hard to poke holes in the execution that they presented in front of us. So yeah, I'm curious if this is an early contender. It's early in the year. It's to say for sure, but I think this is a contender for maybe even an honorable mention at worst.
Yeah, we're not even really 4 months into the year. We're just getting into April, and we got a lot of big movies coming up, of course, this month with The First Omen, with Abigail, the new film from the Ready or Not Scream filmmakers. We got Longlegs coming out this summer, Cuckoo, which two films I know you and I are both super jazzed to watch later this year. But it's funny, I would say my two favorite horror films so far this year, and again, we're very early in the year.
Yeah.
Are religious horror films, Immaculate, and I saw, which we will eventually get to for anyone out there, Late Night with the Devil, the David Dastmalchian led film, which I saw, which we're not reviewing tonight. We will get to eventually, but I absolutely adored that movie, and that might be my favorite horror film of the year so far. Now, again, we're very early on. But yeah, it's kind of weird. The two religious movies have been what I like the best this year so far. So let's see how the rest of the year plays out once we get to Nicolas Cage playing a serial killer and Hunter Schafer in some weird European facility that I have no idea what's actually going on there. Which, by the way, Neon, I think I said this on an earlier podcast. Here's one more thing with the MVP award real quick. Neon, make all the trailers.
Yeah.
Make all the trailers.
They should.
Because while Immaculate gives you a sense of what this film's about, as I said, I thought I went in with an idea. What actually happened totally surprised me. That's when I was like, okay, even though the trailer for Immaculate did give away a little bit, it really didn't, because you have no idea what's actually happening here. And just telling you that a nun gets pregnant really tells you nothing about what this film is. The two trailers I've seen for Cuckoo, the one coming out in August with Hunter Schafer and Dan Stevens, very obscure, weird. I'm sure you saw the trailer for Cuckoo because I saw it twice, so I'm sure you saw it in one of the screenings. It's great. It shows it's 2 minutes of footage, but it tells you nothing. Like, I still have no idea what that movie's about. And I've seen the trailer for Longlegs a couple times. I have no idea what that movie's about, other than I know it stars Nicolas Cage and I know Micah Monroe plays an FBI agent. That's all I know about the film. And I know Osgood Perkins, the son of the great Anthony Perkins, directs and wrote it. That's it. Don't know anything else about it. Don't really want to know anything else about it. Neon, A+ trailer making, folks. Whoever's in charge of trailers over there, keep up the good work.
Yeah, I want to get to know that person and give them a big hug and a kiss. Consensually, of course.
All right, folks, Immaculate is in theaters right now. Check it out. Clearly, we enjoyed this film, and I think you will as well. I want to say a big thank you, as always, to everyone that tunes into the show. Make sure you check us out on all of your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and, of course, over on our YouTube channel. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. It really does mean a lot. It helps us with the algorithm, getting search results and things like that. So please go over and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're continuously trying to grow that. So go over and check us out, and you can even watch us if you want to see our reactions to everything. We are on video over there, so check us out over there. If you got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, hit us up on email anytime, rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rot. livingdead@gmail.com, or find us on social media. We are on Twitter /X, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. Send your messages. We love hearing from you guys, so don't ever hesitate to reach out. We'd love to hear from you and find out what you thought about Immaculate as well. Are you religious? Do you hate us now? Let us know. We want to hear about it. And if you have other questions, you can always hit us up on our personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And a big thank you, as always, for everyone that tunes into the show each and every week. We'll be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will see you then.
Peace.